Now, a question we're being asked quite a lot here on Five Live Science, and incidentally, you can get in touch with us at fivelivescience@bbc.co.uk, is whether the extra lengths we're all going to in terms of hygiene to protect us from COVID-19 might cause us immune problems later because we're now living lives that are too clean. This is the basis of what is dubbed the hygiene hypothesis. But a report out this week says that actually it's the environment we've created rather than the way we clean it and ourselves that really matters, because modern living conditions and building materials, it turns out, select for the wrong sorts of microbes. Microbiologist and author of the report, Graham Rook.
The whole story started in 1989 when it was noticed that children who had older brothers and sisters seemed to be less likely to develop hay fever later on. So it was suggested that this was because the ones without older brothers and sisters were not getting infected with the common infections of childhood. This led to the idea that maybe being too clean was actually the whole problem. So that now you even get people saying we're too clean for our own good. It turns out, of course, to be completely untrue, because when epidemiologists decided to look into whether having the common infections of childhood, things like measles and so on, actually does protect you from developing allergies, it turned out to be quite simply not so, because most of the common infections of childhood are what are called crowd infections. They only affected humans when we started to develop very large urban populations. There's no way that we could have evolved a need to encounter those particular infections.
On the other hand, people do point to poorer countries where people carry a lot of parasites, like worms, for example, and they say there appears to be a relationship between people who carry a lot of these parasites or live in an environment where they're exposed to lots of these sorts of things, and they don't get allergies and they don't get conditions like asthma.
People living in developing countries are obviously exposed to enormous quantities of microorganisms from the natural environment. And one of the most striking bits of very recent research has actually been performed by a group in Finland who had a look at this whole question of what is causing the immune systems of modern children to do crazy things. And what they found was if you take school children that are going to schools which have concrete playgrounds and compare them with children that have playgrounds that are full of the natural environment and grass and flowers and trees and so on, you can do a beautiful experiment. So they took, in fact, leaves and soil and so on from a forest and put it into some of the playgrounds that had concrete. The children that were exposed to the natural environment, not only did they get a change in the microorganisms living on their skin, but they also, and this is the important bit, the ones that were exposed to the material from the natural environment developed higher levels in their blood of various mediators which regulate the immune system and stop it from doing crazy things. So it looks like it's the natural environment, and that's not too surprising. And the microbiota of the modern home is really not that of the natural environment, because if you think about it, our homes used to be caves, or there used to be shelters made from untreated wood from the environment. And it has microorganisms living within it, which really are pretty much the same as those of the natural environment. So traditional homes probably did have microorganisms that were good for us in them. But a modern home built with biocide-treated timber and plasterboard, unnatural materials, develop an unnatural population of microorganisms. And when such houses deteriorate, these microorganisms may become rich in some that are actually harmful to humans, actually toxic. So in other words, the modern home, when it deteriorates, doesn't have in it the microorganisms that you need to meet. It has in it microorganisms that might actually be dangerous to you.
So in summary then, it is down to what sorts of microbes we encounter, but it's the environment that really matters. It's not so much what we catch. It is a familiarity with what we have evolved to run into over our upbringing that really matters. And what we've done by creating the modern world we have is to divorce ourselves from those exposures that would have been more natural to us, and we've created an environment that actually introduces us to all the wrong things. So in fact, cleaning that is a good thing, because if we didn't clean it, we'd be exposed to even more of the wrong things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The organisms that we need are those from mother, because she has microorganisms that actually are adapted to her genetics, they're adapted to her diet, and adapted to her environment. But the other microbiota that we need, the other population of microorganisms, is that from the natural environment. And what the Finnish groups and also some wonderful German research groups have shown is that the only time the microbiota, the microorganisms in the home are of benefit to you is when they actually resemble that of the natural environment. In other words, you see that in the homes of people who live on farms, because an enormous amount of microorganisms are brought in from the cow sheds and the fields and so on. And you also see it in people who have large numbers of cats and dogs. For instance, a beautiful Danish study has shown that the more cats and dogs there are in the home, the less likelihood there is of allergies. And they stated even that by the time you get to 5 cats and dogs, you are down to 0 allergies. But I agree, this is a little over the top for most families.
That was Graham Rook. He is from UCL and he published that report in the journal Allergy and Clinical Immunology.